start. Are they going to be able to see this image too?
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay. What I want to share with you today is basically my obsession with a number of years of dealing with images in my art. This first image that you're looking at, I'm using first because it illustrates for me a number of things that I want to talk about. One of them is that I find that instead of taking a linear progression with my work, that is going from a straight line of involvements, a logical kind of straight line, my work seems to have taken a circular spiraling kind of involvement. And what I mean by that is that I seem to go over the same grounds of concern. Instead of going in a straight line, I go over about 7 basic ways of working over and over again. And this is one of the basic ways. This, for me, is symbolizing a figure of a woman who has concentric circles for a head, energy radiating out of her head. And these forms are breast forms and energy forms coming out of those breast forms. And I seem to return to this kind of image no matter what media I'm using. I seem to return to it over and over again. When I first did this painting, I would not have described it the way I just now did. I saw it as a form. I didn't think of it as necessarily a female form. Each of these slides that I'm going to be showing you will be representative of 20 to 30 other kinds of paintings that were done in the same vein. This was done in 1961, and I did a complete series of works. And this particular painting is about 6 feet tall, to give you a little scale, and it's oil painting. The other kind of thing that I popped from that very abstract image into doing this kind of thing, this is obviously a figure, and I began to be very involved with using a woman as an image. And again, there's this kind of energy radiating from her head. And I wanted to begin to depict all the facets of women. Now, some of these early paintings you can see are very much influenced by Matisse and his style of work. And they were done in the mid-60s. I was also quite concerned with using pattern in my work, a lot of color at this particular time. This is another image from that time, and you have 2 women here, but these 2 women are not communicating. They're women who are isolated, they're alone, and this is the way I think we were in the 60s. Women really weren't coming together, we really weren't talking. Women's revolution had not taken hold. We were together, but we were alone, and we were not, these women are not looking in each other's eyes. They're very much pulled into themselves and thinking their own private kinds of thoughts, which I would not have described this work at that time the way I just did, but I look back on it and then I see what I was really dealing with, what comes out intuitively, what comes out without really thinking about it. And a lot of the comments that I make about these earlier works are made in hindsight. They're not things that I would have made at the time. This work relates back to the very first painting that you saw, and there's a 10-year period between the first work and this one. I returned again to working in the same format that I had 10 years before. Again, the concentric circles for a head, the triangular shape for the body, and then the arms coming up have corn-like forms. And I was beginning to see this at this time as being a powerful woman image. I was beginning to relate it to the image of the goddess, and the goddess is a subject that I use a lot in my work, and I've done quite a bit of research into the goddess. I was first turned on and tuned into this notion through reading a lot of work that Jung had written, and through a seminar that I was involved with in Washington, D.C. for 5 years. It was a seminar that was not a course, but it was an informal group of people who got together because they wanted to share ideas about symbolism. There were psychiatrists and a theologian and myself basically involved in the group. And from that, I learned about the great goddess, and this I realized when I looked back at some of my other work was what I had been dealing with in some of these early women figures. These early women figures look to me now like they're goddess figures, like they're women who are in charge, women who are not taking orders from someone else, women who have control of their own lives. This particular work was done not just as a painting by itself. It was done with a group of 5 people who were artists that I was dealing with in Washington, or communicating with, or friends with, however you want to put it. We decided that we wanted to do a project together, and what we settled on was we took a drawing of one artist named Bob Stackhouse, and we decided that the second artist would do a piece of sculpture based on that drawing, and the third artist would then do a painting based on the sculpture and the drawing, and the fourth artist would do a sculpture then from the painting, and the fifth artist would do a kind of summary of all that through drawings and paintings and sculpture. And this was the third piece that was done, and this took into consideration a drawing and a piece of sculpture that were done, and those elements are incorporated into this painting. And then we showed the work together, thinking that we had stumbled upon a brilliant idea, but we got absolutely no feedback or notoriety or anything from it, but we enjoyed the process ourselves. And that was done in Washington, D.C. in 71, I think, it was when we did that. We are doing something wonderful. We've got the slides out of sync again. And so what we will do, this should have been shown before the thing that we just saw. This is one of the paintings that relates to the series that I was doing with women earlier. One of the things that I was concerned with at the time that I was doing these women, as I said, was all facets of women. And I was concerned, I was active in the civil rights movement at that time, and a lot of the paintings that I did concerned black families sitting around a table, eating together, working together. And then I did a series that were white families, integrated families, futuristic families, and it was my kind of utopia that I was painting in my work. I did that when I was living in Indianapolis, Indiana at the time, but there was really absolutely no demand for a white woman dealing with this subject matter, and nobody seemed to be very interested in what I had to say with it, so I kind of slid off of that and moved on to something else. I don't know what we can do about these slides because they're really out of order now. I guess the best, just keep going. After I finish the series that you've just seen, now what's going to happen is that these slides, they're 2 carousels, and we're supposed to have them in order, and I'm not getting them in order now, so I'm going to have to be backtracking with what I'm saying. This comes from a series that I did when I moved to Washington, D.C., and I suddenly very dramatically changed the kind of subject that I had been dealing with and went into a surrealistic kind of concern. And this grew also out of this Jungian seminar that I mentioned that I was involved with in Washington. I began to do very somber looking works, and these these came out of some life experiences that I was going through. It was a very difficult period in my life, and it began to be reflected, as I think almost all my work has been autobiographical, it began to be reflected in my work. Basically what I was dealing with here was a set of symbologies. All of the works in this period had a passage that you entered through. You couldn't tell where you were going in the passage. It was an unknown area. The foreground usually had something bright, some sort of flower or sort of an opening in it. And on the sides were these projections of organic, phallic, plant-like things that were coming out, and they were quite threatening. They were threatening the environment. They were threatening you if you would visualize walking through this environment. There was also a landscape that took you back into a situation where there was a little bit of light on the horizon, a light that showed some kind of hope if you could get through all of this mishmash that was in the foreground to this other situation. Possibly you would find a better life situation. This is typical of this series, an open flower, which I was symbolizing, using as a symbol of maiden or the young.
We're gonna get the slides right. So that they've stopped.
In this particular slide, it's very much like the one that you just saw, in that you have a foreground situation, a passage, and these threatening organic shapes coming from the side. I was going through, with my own life, a kind of passage. So the passage, whatever I did, it seemed to come up in the work. I wasn't sure, I think at this stage, what the passage was going to be. The passage became clearer as I continued working through this. I was on my own for the first time. I was raising my children by myself for the first time, and in a very new environment. And these are the kinds of elements. I was really afraid, and I think it comes out rather heavily. These early works, or this batch of work, seems to be full of fear.
The 60s?
This is in the early 70s. My forward button is not working. Well, the thing that really helped me through this kind of period was getting involved with both my art and the feminist movement. A lot of times people talk about the feminist movement in terms of it as an incidental in their lives, or it helped a little bit, but I can tell you that it helped enormously in my life. It helped me to be assertive. It helped me to get through these kinds of mountains that I was dealing with, and I'm really grateful to it. This is another kind of image that I use over and over again, which is a mountain kind of form. And I see myself and portray myself as I see myself in these works. And one of the ways that I saw myself was as heavy. And I thought of myself as a mountain, as being heavy, as a person who needs to be lighter. And when I began to do the mountains, and I started to think of ways to lighten myself up. And so I let the mountain float in some of my later works, anything to get that heaviness off the ground and to lighten it up. So in later, especially in drawings, I began to let my mountain come up off of the ground. I think of the mountain also as just being a general symbol for women. It's a breast-like form, obviously, or a womb-like form, and also it has the crevices, the protection, and for me, it's also a spiritual kind of thing. It's something to attain, something to get to, and it usually is off in the horizon. Here are two forms that are symbolic for me of two women opening. The flower has been used a lot by women as a symbol of the self, and especially as we emerge as a symbol, an opening, or showing the flower closed and then gradually coming open. Will we focus this? This particular work was the first painting that I did where I was conscious of using a feminist statement. And on this surreal kind of landscape, I put a female whose head had been severed from her body. And to me, this was a statement of what I felt society did to women, which was to separate our heads from our bodies. So this is the same woman with her head floating in one place and her body floating in another place. On the landscape also are these mountains, which are kind of molar-like, devouring mountains. This isn't a friendly landscape that the woman finds herself floating in. This, again, is relating and referring back to the mountain. I used in some of my earlier paintings the cat as a rather passive, docile, domestic animal, but here the cat is beginning to be threatened. The cat is coming alive. It is attacking. It is willing to act. Again, I think of this as a symbol of women and what was happening at that time, looking to the mountain. The cat in this one has become a tiger, coming out of a landscape that is getting to be a little less threatening, a little more light coming into the landscape. The passage in the center has a little more opening to it, and it doesn't look quite as threatening. It looks like a passage you could actually get through and go to someplace else. These forms across here, which you can't see too clearly on this slide, but those forms for me were tracks, but they were spiritual tracks. They were tracks in the mind. They were a map in the mind, or a diagram, a spirit diagram of going from one state of consciousness to another state of consciousness, and they float through this landscape above the passage and into or out of, depending upon which direction you're going, of the tiger that's coming in. The tiger is coming in from outside inside. It's coming from the landscape, the exterior world to the interior world. I also thought of this interior world, and as you notice, these are painted as if you were enclosed inside. Women are inside so much of the time, so much during the day. We're inside of our house. We're inside of an individual living unit separated from other individual living units. And I think this is another kind of thing that women are moving out of and away from, instead of each woman in a house separated from the women in the neighborhood or in the community. The interior is becoming more airy and less of an enclosure, but we're still looking from the inside out. The interior is beginning to disappear even more here. You're half in and half out. The name of this painting is Spring, and while it looks again like a threatening situation, I was thinking of it as being a rebirth situation. Here again is another cat, which you may not be able to see very clearly, but it is a cat that's coming in out of a closet, out of an enclosed situation that is going to come into this environment. It's a very threatening cat. On the horizon, there are two snakes that are entwined, and I think of the snake not as a negative symbol, but as a positive symbol, as a symbol of rebirth. The snake sheds its skin. It appears to have a new life in the spring. It goes into the ground, and you're not sure where or how it comes up again and out into a new life or rebirth situation. And the snake was thought of by primitive people as being a rebirth symbol, especially because of the shedding of the skin. The very phallic symbols are still here and still threatening us on the side, but are beginning to disappear in this painting. This was one of the last of this particular series. To give you an idea of scale, this is an enormous painting. It's about 10 feet by 12 feet, and most of the paintings that you've been looking at have been very large paintings. They are a landscape situation that you feel that you could walk into. I think this was probably the most successful painting of the series. The window is open and the landscape has become much brighter and lighter. In this, the foreground of this painting, there is not a solid ground, but a watery sort of ground. And on that ground, the open flower is floating. I got this notion from a dream that I had about walking into a passage, into a situation. I use my dreams quite often. I try to analyze what they're saying to me, what kind of imagery is coming up through my dreams that I can use in my art. And I try to unlock what it's saying and use it, the symbology that's there. This particular dream, I was walking into a situation that was threatening. I keep mentioning these things, threatening and fear, over and over again with this period, because that's what I was dealing with emotionally. I walked into a situation that I thought was going to be like quicksand, that I was going to sink into it, but I was so curious. I wanted to know what was happening so badly that I walked into this landscape anyway. And as I got into it, everything was liquid. The ceilings, the walls, the ground was completely non-solid. And it was wonderful as I got into it. I was moonwalking and bouncing and floating, and it was this kind of joyous surrounding of a different kind of atmosphere in a different world. And I realized through this dream that a lot of the fear that I was going through and the risks that I was taking was really going to lighten me up, and was really going to allow me to get into a new situation. And so I began using this liquid on the floor as a symbol of being able to get into another life situation. This is a little tiny work. There's snakes coiled up in the foreground and a rose in the background. And it is, in contrast to the painting that you just saw, it's a little 10-inch by 12-inch work on paper. Again, I'm using the symbology of rebirth and the passage, and I'm trying to use the rose as a spiraling form and the snake as a spiraling form, and contrasting sort of the beauty of these two forms. I used a lot of rocks in these paintings too, and the rocks took on rather body-like forms, legs or arms or torsos. In this particular series, I am now going completely away from having anything in the passage except for the walls and the very liquid flooring, the liquid way that you have to get through. I see these, this series as symbolizing the unconscious, going down into a psychological state, a passage that takes you into yourself, a journey, a pilgrimage. And I did a number of paintings. These are all about 9 feet by 7 feet, using the walls and passage. They're all in black and white. There's no color in these paintings. This was the last of this series, and also just about the last painting that I did, I suddenly decided that I didn't want to paint anymore. I'd been painting for 18 years. I felt I'd said what I wanted to say with a paint brush for a while, so I hung up my paintbrush, and I began to try to think of how I wanted to express myself, what other ways I wanted to say what I had to say. And one of the things that was beginning to grow on me was that I didn't want to be isolated in a studio by myself, doing work for myself, and taking the chance that I wasn't communicating with anybody else. I wanted to know that I was communicating with other people. I wanted to get out of myself, out of this kind of pulling in thing that I had been into for a number of years. And so what I decided to do was a project. And I set a project up that really tricked me into not painting anymore. I felt I had to do this because I didn't think I would really quit painting unless I tricked myself into it. So I asked 22 people to come to my studio, 22 people at separate times, to look at my work, to discuss it with me, and then to suggest a work that they would like to see me execute. And I then did an exhibition based on the 22 different ideas that were given to me by people. I asked them not to give me any suggestions that had to do with painting, although some people did anyway. But most of the works pulled me away from painting. Now, in addition to the wish to stop painting, I also wanted to take my psyche and combine it with another person's psyche, to take my consciousness and merge it with another person's consciousness, to try to see if I could merge some of my unconscious with someone else's unconscious. And by all of these merging, come up with a third energy, and to do the work then after that third energy. The things I'm going to show you now are some of the works that I did from this project. This first slide is the first thing that was asked of me was to take the painting that you just saw and to make it a dimensional passage. And I installed this dimensional passage in the Corcoran Gallery of Art, and this was done in 71 and 72. This piece is made out of foam rubber and canvas. I made huge waves about 40 inches high and stuffed them with foam rubber, and the across from this is 22 feet and it's 17 feet deep, and the waves gradually got smaller as you went back down into the piece, and people coming to the exhibit were invited to walk on these waves, to roll on them, jump on them, do whatever they would like, and to walk through this passage. And it gave you this kind of light, airy moon bounce walk that I described, that I felt in my dream when you walked through this passage and on the waves. So this was the first of the projects. This was quite a large installation, and the slide doesn't show it completely. The rest of the work was installed in the Henri Gallery, and they were all smaller pieces. This was the entry room into the piece that you just saw, and on the wall I had drawings and sketches that led up to the dimensional passage. This is a fire piece, and it was the first of the fire pieces that I did. A student that was my assistant at the time, Laura Gregory, suggested to me that I do a piece meditating first on the situation I described to you that was very difficult that I went through, visualizing if I had to go through a situation like that again, what it would do to me. And I got into meditating on this, and I realized that what it would do would completely transform me. And so I began to think about symbols that had to do with transformations, and I was led again into a dream that I had. And in that dream, and I had this dream while I was trying to figure out how to solve this almost riddle that she gave me of how to do a piece after a projected emotional situation. And in the dream, I was cleaning up a room that was very messy, and I was throwing everything that was in the room into a fireplace because I couldn't seem to get it cleaned up. And the more I threw things into the fireplace, the more cluttered the room got. I began to throw in the tables, the chairs, everything, just to get things out of this room, to get it away from the room. And as I was throwing these things into the fireplace, a bear came into the room, a huge live bear, and I thought to myself, what is this bear doing in here? You know, it's just more clutter. And I picked up this huge bear and threw it into the fireplace. And as I did this, I realized I'd done this horrible thing in burning this beautiful wild beast. And I looked at this beast burning, and I noticed that it had a cub. And in that instant, I realized that what I was doing was looking at myself, that I was the cub, that I was the mother bear, and that the cub was my child, and that this was the kind of transformation that I had to deal with, and that the transformation had to deal with fire. And then I began thinking about fire and how I could make an art piece from fire. And fire, to me, is the ultimate transformation symbol, and I've continued using fire since this project. The piece, this is a close-up of the piece. The piece is actually a copper ring, and the ring has holes drilled in it, and it is attached to a propane tank. And when the tank is turned on and you light the copper tubing, then fire comes. This is much like a propane gas stove would operate, and you can regulate that by turning the propane tank up higher or lower, and you'll see more examples of aspiring because I continued using this in pieces later on. This piece was suggested to me by Gene Davis. He said, try to project yourself into a prenatal state. How did it feel before you were born? And so I got into thinking again about this floating state, and I made a piece that was similar to that first piece where I have canvas that I stuffed with foam rubber, and people were invited to roll on this, and it was made in a spiral shape to symbolize a kind of umbilical cord floating womb state. One of the other suggestions Ed McGowan gave to me, he said make a religious piece that has, about organized religion, that's where the social implications, the philosophical implications are very obvious, and that it should be a negative statement about organized religion. And as I got into that, the obvious thing was that women had been cut out of any high posts in organized religion. So I cut out the male heads from the Last Supper and substituted contemporary American women artists' heads in the main section of the painting. And then I collected all of the photographs that I could of women artists. And I did this collection in 1971, and this was all the photographs I could get a hold of at that time. You can imagine how many thousands of photographs I would have today if I were to repeat this piece. But I have 81 women on this poster, and then I made an edition of 500, and I have now made a second edition because I had no more of the first edition left. This has been reproduced pretty much around the world, and I guess it's my icon image that I'm best known for. This one is called Alice's Dream, and it was suggested to me by Alice Denny that I try to figure out what she would dream and then make a piece after that. And I got into, you can't see the inside of this obviously, but this was something that was turned on. There were lights in the inside, and there were passages and made out of gourds and mirrors that reflected the passages, so that you looked like you were looking into deep space. I gave up trying to figure out what her dream was, and I just got into what for me was a kind of archetypal dream image. And this plugged in, and you looked through the hole to see it. Walter Hopps suggested that I do a sequential religious piece, and this is easier to see in the box. I made a box with 4 sections that had wood tablets in it, and in each of the sections I tried to figure 14 stages of life, and in 4 different phases, and so that people coming to the exhibit would flip through the wooden tablets and see these stages revealed to them. So it was a kind of human evolution that I took as being a sequential religious piece. And I continued making boxes like this a long time after this particular exhibition was over. This is not a piece that was done for the 22 others show. That's all I'm going to show you from that particular exhibition. These are works that I've done since that time. I continued making boxes with wooden tablets in them, and I sometimes made them so that they were in private situations, so you felt like you were by yourself, so that you felt like you had a very personal situation. The first of the tablets that I made were wood, and I depicted various symbols on the wooden tablets, and then later I made paper tablets, and on the paper tablets I stamped topics that I was interested in that had to do with a particular exhibition, and then I asked people coming to the exhibition to write on the paper tablets. I asked them to share their stories on the topics that were stamped on the paper tablets. The first of the topics that I got into had to do with old myths, new myths. And what I wanted to do was collect the myths that we were brought up with, and those I depicted on wooden tablets. And then I had a second box that had the paper tablets, and on those were stamped mother stories, father stories, story of your life, philosophy of your life. And I asked people then to write these stories and leave them for others to read in the exhibition. This was the drawing that went with old myths, new myths, and this is a large drawing, and in front of it, on this side, the wooden tablets were placed, and on this side, paper tablets were placed. I got into using the paper tablets because of this particular piece. At first, I was going to make the whole thing wooden tablets, and I realized that it was very presumptuous of me to think that I could figure out what our mythology was today, because that is something that grows out of a people. It's what people in society know about, and what they bring to a situation, and not something that can be imposed on others. And I also was still harking back to this notion of I wanted more participation in the work that I was doing. I wanted people to not just come to the exhibit and see what I had to say. I wanted them to be able to say something too. So all of the exhibits that I've had since this time, I have a story gathering box at some point in the exhibit. I've collected over 600 stories now, and I hope someday to collect them because they are wonderful stories that people write. They are not like anything that you read anywhere else, because a person does not contrive to write a story when they come to this situation. They just write what's spontaneous, what comes to them at the time. And the people writing are not writers. They're not people who usually publish work. So it's a rather interesting gathering of stories. Some of the things that I have collected are sexual fantasies, and these I have done again in story form. I sent 150 letters out to artists around the country asking them to send me their sexual fantasies, and then I put them in this book, and then did wooden tablets depicting the things that they had said. And I collected these in '71 and '72, and I'd like to do this again sometime soon, because I think they would be quite different from the ones that I collected originally. People were a little bit uptight the first time they did it, and they were hesitant to reveal much that was very personal. I think we've all loosened up a lot since that time, so I think that the fantasies would be quite different. This piece is called Blood Mysteries, and in the story gathering box in Blood Mysteries, I gathered menstruation stories, blood power stories, menopause stories, and birth power stories. And women were asked to write stories, their own personal experiences, and leave them for others to read. And this, I think, has been one of the most dynamic of the collection of stories that I've made. Some truly wonderful things that were written by women who came to the exhibit. In the magazine Lady Unique, Inclinations of the Night, they published a few of those stories in their first issue. We're going to switch to another carousel. The stories that I collected from the last show that I did had to do with witch burning stories, and they were asking women to write about their memories of burning and about stories that they had heard. This now starts into a photographic series. I started to get away from doing the large drawings and into photographing and doing rituals. I began to use my own body as a stand-in for the goddess. I began using my own body as a symbol of every woman. I was not interested in saying, this is me, Mary Beth Edelson. This is what we are going through, a symbol of what we are experiencing. And I began moving away from explorations of what I am to explorations of what we are. In this slide, which is called Moon Mouth, I painted my body concentric circles on my womb or on my belly and on my breast, and then I used the moon shape for the mouth. The first time I did this series, I had no idea when I photographed my body what I would look like. I felt like, well, I went into a deserted area and photographed myself by myself, and I always do these rituals by myself because I feel like the psychic energy would change if anybody else were there or observing me, or I would feel like a performer. So these are things that I do by myself. I take my camera out and I set it on time release, and so I'm able to do these things completely by myself. And the first time I did them, I felt that my body would look so horrible I would never be able to use it. And I think it was a real revelation to me that I just looked like everybody else, and that there was nothing really ghastly going on. And I mention this simply because I think women get really hung up in picking their bodies apart and thinking, you know, my legs are too short, or my legs are too long, or, you know, all these insecurities we have about ourselves. And this was a way for me to become more secure about my body. It happened as an incidental situation, not as something that I had designed to happen, by photographing my body in this manner. So this series, I was thinking of sexual rights and our kinds of sexual independence, and the fact that women have to own their own bodies and have to be in charge of their own sexuality, because that is the way that we're in charge of our own lives. And if we're not in charge of that, we are controlled if we're not in charge of our own sexuality. In my studio, I made a fire ring like the fire ring that you saw earlier, and this one is 6 feet across, 6 feet in diameter, and it looks, you see a glow off the fire ring here. You don't see the individual flames because I had it on about a 15-second exposure, and that's what happens to the flames. You get a glow instead of an individual flame. The name of this piece is Bride of the Fire, and this is a private ritual that I was doing in my own studio. I do a rather extensive preparation before I do these rituals. I do a lot of sketching and drawing and thinking of various body positions and layering a meaning, what this means, on as many different levels as I can think of. And then when I begin to actually do the rituals, I put all of that out of my mind, and I meditate, and I get myself into a state, and then I do whatever comes, whatever flows. And sometimes what flows is what I prepared, and sometimes something completely different and spontaneous happens. The camera has become so second nature for me now that fiddling with that doesn't interfere with what I'm doing. The name of this work is Goddess Head, and here I'm using a collage technique as well as drawing on the photograph. These photographs I show two ways. I blow them up so that they're 40 inches by 40 inches, so that they're really a large poster size, and there's a rather dynamic effect from them. And I also show them as very small photographs, 6 inches by 6 inches. And when they're small, you can actually see the collage and the drawing on the photograph, and they're a more intimate kind of thing. When they're large, I re-photograph the collage, and you don't see anything of the hand. It's just the projected image that you see. This image I used in an exhibition called Woman Rising, and I used it as my poster and as my announcement for it. And I did this at the same time that I did the first images of sexual rights. This private ritual is called Giving Birth to Myself. I used the Uroboric snake as a rebirth mechanism, and photographed myself on an island in Maine in front of rocks that looked like an opening of a cave, although it was not actually a cave. In this is a series of slides, and it's not, I don't think it's going to be in its proper series, but we'll see. I'm trying to transform myself into a bird in this series, and I'm going into a kind of meditative state, and then I transform myself into a bird-like image. This is again a series of 3 photographs, and I'm again involved with some kind of transformation, spiraling in my head, and then I take the back of my body and make it the front of my body by putting my breasts on the back of my body. And I noticed when I did this that it looked like Walt Disney's dog Pluto. And I began to think then of the dog and then of Pluto in mythology. And Pluto is the king of Hades, of the underworld. And that led me into thinking about the patriarchy, and that led me into the last slide, which was just to stick my tongue out at the patriarchy, a kind of, sometimes we know it's going to take a long time to get where we want to get, and that's about the only statement that can be made at some times. This was done on the island in Maine. Again, I got myself underneath a phallic rock and began to think about the oppression that women have experienced. And this became quite a reality for me because I got myself under this rock and I couldn't get out. And I realized that I was on this island by myself and gave everybody orders not to come on the island all day. And there I was stuck underneath this rock. But I finally wiggled myself out. But I was trying to get the look of being trapped, and I carried it a little bit too far. This is a part of a 3 series, and this is the first called Before the Release, and this one is Release. And the third of the series is Victory in My Long White Beard. So I figured it'll take us a while to get where we want to go. On the back rock, you see there are 9 marks, and those are symbolizing the 9 gold cups in the tarot pack that symbolize victory. This is a photographic essay, and there are 4 images to this, and it's called Aging in Diana's Grove. The first, the dialogue that goes, or text that goes with the first one is, through the branches of the trees, there appears to be a woman as beautiful as Venus. As you approach, she seems to be changing. She is a very old woman, but you don't mind because you knew it all along. The last image of the series. She is an old, the old woman is full of secrets. Will she let you know? Now, this is from an entirely different series now, an installation shot from an exhibition that I had in last year in La Jolla at the University of California, San Diego, in the Manville Gallery, and it was curated by Arlene Raven. And in this exhibition titled Your 5,000 Years Are Up, we not only put in photographic works and a sculptural installation, but we also did a performance with the installation. 20 women from the Women's Building came down to La Jolla to work with me on this ritual performance that we did. And the ritual performance was took place the opening of the exhibition. And what we did consisted mainly of chants. And the content that I was dealing with was what I thought of as the liturgy of the feminist movement. To me, we have come from a situation of isolation and non-communicating with each other. We have come together, and the first time we came together, we didn't get along. We didn't have the skills or tools for communicating with each other, and we got into fights. We bickered with each other. We then withdrew back into our isolation, but we were even more miserable than we were to start out with because we knew we could communicate. So we came together again, a second time, and this time we were wiser and we had learned something about communicating and about giving and taking. And we began to really talk with each other. We let out our gripes, we let out our complaints, and then we began to rage. We began to be very angry at what had happened. We let out our anger, we let out our rage, and out of that came our strength. Out of that, all of these discussions, we began to define ourselves, we began to know who we were, and to, out of this definition, we began to feel better about ourselves. And in some cases, some women got into a kind of spiritual thing and into the goddess, and some women got into other areas. And I was addressing this liturgy mostly to women who were into spirituality. And from that, we began to celebrate. And so I was dealing in this liturgy with these emotional states. And in the beginning of the performance, there were 11 of us inside of the fire circle, and that was the only light in the gallery. This fire circle is 13 feet across. We sat in the center of it, and we began to wail, and we began to rock back and forth as we wailed. And we were very much just into ourselves and into our own emotional state. Then we began to communicate with each other, and out of this communication, we began to get a little bit too loud, a little bit too noisy. And so we began to hush. Shh, keep it down, don't let anybody hear us. Shh, shh, shh. And one woman continued making noise. One woman continued wailing and continued letting her sounds come up. And as this one woman did this, we told her to hush, and then we began to have compassion for her. We began to comfort her. And out of our comforting her, we began to become frustrated because we couldn't do anything about helping her. And out of this frustration, our rage grew. And our rage grew and grew and grew. And what we were doing then during this time, all of this was done with chants. None of it was done with actual sound. There were only a few words that we actually spoke. Our rage began to sound like yelping dogs, and we got completely out of control of ourselves and out of our sounds. By letting this happen, by letting ourselves lose control, we gained control, and then we began to chant soothing sorts of sounds. All this time our bodies are rocking. It's a very rhythmic kind of thing that's happening. While this chanting is going on, unknown to people in the audience, there are 7 women inside of this piece of sculpture that's in the back. This looks like a formal piece of sculpture. I have a close-up of that. It's 7 mourning figures that are 8 feet tall and 5 feet into the gallery, and they're made out of cloth that has palmer on top of it, so that the cloth is semi-stiff. It's not real stiff, but it's not flapping and flowing either. And inside of that, there is a wooden armature so that they can be moved around. While we were doing the chants and beginning to build the chants, these forms lifted off of the wall and came into the room and began moving and circling around us. And the forms are very ominous. And people that were at the performance were on the ground, so these things loomed over them. They then made movements that either echoed what we were saying or extended the meaning of what we were saying. And they moved as we continued chanting. When we came to the part where we were raging, they ran helter-skelter out of control in the gallery. And then we moved into a chant of the goddess is here. And we chanted, the goddess is here, is here, is here, is us, is us, is us, is us. And out of that came then a very melodic sound that went into ah woman, ah woman, ah woman. And made a circular sound above us. And as we went into that sound, the figures that had been moving around the gallery went back on the wall, hung themselves back on the wall, and then the women came out from the forms and joined us in the circle, center of the fire ring, for the last part of the chant. And that turned into a celebration then, and we invited the people in the audience to dance with us, and the lights went on, and then we didn't have a formal ending to the ritual. We just simply danced and continued dancing for a couple of hours. This is the only slide I have of us actually in the fire ring. It was so dark in the gallery that a number of people were taking photographs, but the only one that turned out was this one. This is an installation shot from an exhibit that I did this last fall at the AIR Gallery, and the title of this exhibit was Proposals for Memorials to the 9 Million Women Who Were Burned as Witches in the Christian Era. And I had done, for this exhibit, a lot of research on women who had the witch burning. And the reason I got into this is not because I'm into witchcraft, because I'm not. It's because I'm into the goddess. And I was asking myself this question, and I couldn't seem to find an answer to it. How did they finally wipe out goddess worship? I knew that a number of religions had come in, Christianity had come in and taken over a major role, but I also knew from my research that a lot of women continued worshiping, and men continued worshiping the goddess, but it seemed to be a certain point where it just was cut off. There just was no more. And I was trying to find out how that happened and when it happened. And everyone said to me, well, it was just simply because Christianity was a superior religion, and people acknowledged that, and that's the reason, and that I did not accept. So that questioning led me to the witch burning, and I found that that was the way they finally stamped out goddess worship, is that these women were burned as witches, and they were tortured systematically throughout Europe from the 12th century up into the 17th century. And the things I found out in this research were absolutely abominable, what they did to the women. They were not just women who were worshiping the goddess that they burned. They were women that they wanted to get rid of for any reason at all. If they thought they were too old, a drain on the economy, they burned them. If they were women who were wealthy, who did not have the protection of a male in the family, and a neighbor wanted her land, she got burned and the neighbor took the land. If the woman was a lesbian, she was burned. If the woman was a bit eccentric, she was burned. If the woman had political ideals that were different from the church, she was burned. If there were, early on, what they burned in the 11th and early 12th century were any groups, both men and women, who opposed the Catholic Church. And these groups were systematically rooted out and completely destroyed during that time. After they finished that, they had this well-oiled machine going, and so they continued trying to find the people that they thought were the greatest heretics of all, and that they decided were people who practiced magic, and that meant women. And then that's when the witch burning started. So in this exhibit, I was trying to talk about these things. You entered the exhibit by going through this passageway, and on the passage you see photographs of women's hands, and these are holding the gesture of the bull's horns. Now this sign is today used as a hex sign or an evil sign, but originally, as far as I can tell, it was a sacred sign, and it referred to the bull, which was a sacred